Welcome everybody to this evening's virtual program. We're going to give people just a minute or so to keep joining. My name is Andrew Gustafson. I am from Turnstile Tours, and I am so happy to again be working with the Friends of Olmsted-Beil House to present this really fantastic program about something that I actually did not know about. We're going to be talking about Staten Island's the role that Frederick Law Olmsted played in influencing the shape and the future of Staten Island as we celebrate the 150th anniversary of this report that he wrote back in 1871. So a little bit about how things are going to work this evening. So I will be joined by a wonderful panel of incredible guests. We encourage you to ask questions. So you can do that in the chat. So please drop your questions in there. Also drop in there where you're joining us from. I know we have people who signed up from all over the country, and we also have a lot of Staten Islanders. So you can do that in the chat. Just remember, you can select host and panelists, in which case just myself and the folks presenting tonight will be able to see it. If you'd like everyone to see it, just select everyone. We also have closed captioning available for the program this evening, which you can turn on or off down at the bottom of your screen. I just wanted to acknowledge the organizations that are involved in presenting tonight's program. So a big thank you, of course, to our friends at the Friends of Olmsted-Beil House who put this panel together, and we at Turnstile Tours are just providing some technical support this evening. So please be sure to check them out and support them at olmstedbeilhouse.org. We're also presenting this program as part of the National Association of Olmsted Parks Olmsted 200 program. So visit their website as well, olmsted200.org, to see celebrations and programs happening all across the country as we approach Frederick Law Olmsted's 200th birthday in 2022. So a little bit about who you're going to be hearing from tonight. First, we have Eileen Monreali, who is the president of the Friends of Olmsted-Beil House, who's going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the organization and the great work that they're doing to preserve this incredible little corner of New York City, the former farmstead of Frederick Law Olmsted. We're also going to be joined by Seavitt Nordenson, who is the Director of Graduate Landscape Architecture at City College's Spitzer School of Architecture. And she's really going to set up the context for this report and share a little bit about Olmsted's background in landscape architecture and what brought him to Staten Island, a place that really shaped so much of his career, and vice versa. We'll then be joined by Ed Johnson, who is a lifelong Staten Islander and naturalist. He's the emeritus curator of science at the Staten Island Museum. He's the former adjunct professor at the College of Staten Island and the former caretaker of the Conference House. So he has many, many Staten Island connections. We also have Jessica Kratz, who is the coordinator of the Staten Island Greenbelt Center, who is going to share with us a little bit of the legacy of this report that Ed will really provide a lot of information about what this report entailed that was really planned to be transformative for Staten Island. And I'm just going to be here to facilitate and answer and pass your questions along that you might have to our wonderful guests. So what I want to do now is pass it over to Eileen, who is going to give us a little bit of background on this great organization.
Super. Thank you so much, Andrew. I'm thrilled to be here tonight for Olmsted Public Health and Urban Planning with three distinguished speakers to take a fresh and in many ways new or first look at this plan created by Frederick Law Olmsted when he lived on Staten Island. The program was created and organized by the hard work and dedication of Friends of Olmsted-Beil House board member, Maureen Marlowe. So thank you so much, Maureen. We're really excited about tonight. Friends of Olmsted-Beil House was created in 2018 by a group of community volunteers who are passionate and dedicated to the mission to protect, preserve, and present the Olmsted-Beil Historic Site in Eltingville. Once you see the 17th century farmhouse and the sweeping, though small landscape with Osage orange, cedar of Lebanon trees, all planted by Olmsted himself, you realize that it is a miracle that this site was preserved. So we're working to see the house restored to be opened to the public for education, school trips, and visitors from across the country. The house is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, and it is really a special place that we ask for your support because it is closed, it's in need of restoration, and we ask you, please consider joining as a member of Friends of Olmsted-Beil House. The Friends of Olmsted-Beil House is a proud partner of the National Association for Olmsted Parks campaign to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Olmsted's birth. And we are delighted that they have joined us tonight. So without further delay, I am honored to introduce our first speaker, Professor Catherine Seavitt Nordenson.
Great, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here today as part of the 150th anniversary of the 1871 publication of Frederick Law Olmsted's Staten Island Improvement Commission report. Thank you to Eileen and Maureen at Friends of the Olmsted-Beil House for this kind invitation. And I'm also very happy to be part of this panel with both Ed Johnson and Jessica Kratz as well. And finally, a special thank you to my colleague at City College of New York, the landscape historian Michael King, who helped with the research for tonight's presentation. Many of you here this evening are likely aware of Olmsted's deep connections to Staten Island, but for most people, Olmsted is generally regarded as the father of landscape architecture and well known as the creator, along with Calvert Vaux and others, of Central Park in Manhattan. Tonight, I'd like to expand on these aspects of his career by exploring the lesser known importance of his years spent as a young man on Staten Island from the age of about 25 to 35, from 1848 through 58. We'll explore the seeds sown there and the voyages that departed from and returned to this island that were critical to his pursuit of what we now call landscape architecture, a term that was just emerging at that time. Olmsted was certainly exploring his identity on Staten Island as a farmer, a writer, and an editor. Meanwhile, despite this focus on the land and the landscape, it is possible that perhaps what Olmsted most enjoyed were the watery realms of the sea. 5 years earlier, he had come to New York with the dream of becoming a sailor. As a young man, Olmsted also developed his interest through various authorial guises deployed in his earliest writings. He wrote under several pen names in these early texts, aliases that reflected the lenses through which he would voice his written opinions. Wayfarer for his report on the walking tour of England and Liverpool's Birkenhead Park. Yeoman for his chronicles of agricultural tours through the slaveholding states of the American South that would result in his book, The Cotton Kingdom. And American Farmer for a report on the utopian farming community. Indeed, Olmsted's point of view as an author was that as a farmer, albeit a well-heeled gentleman farmer. And his ideas of the connection of landscape and public health, as revealed in the Improvement Commission report decades later, would emerge from this view. On January 1st, 1848, Frederick Law Olmsted's father, John Olmsted, purchased a farm for his 26-year-old son on the southern shore of Staten Island, New York. It was the second such farm, the first being Sachem's Head, 70 acres on the southern coast of Connecticut, near the family's home in Hartford, which was purchased by the elder Olmsted when his wayward son chose to try his hand as a scientific farmer. The much larger Staten Island farm at 130 acres, purchased from Samuel Ackerley and renamed by the Olmsteds as Tossamuck Farm, would be the second farm abandoned along Olmsted's path to becoming a landscape architect, a path that entailed a detour into a writing career. Both farms were located on the Atlantic coast, with extraordinary views of the sea. Indeed, Olmsted's beautiful nautical prose appears in a letter to his brother John Hole Olmsted on March 6, 1848, describing his dramatic voyage, moving both his furniture and his potatoes for the market via a 54-foot single-masted sailboat, the Juliet, from Sachem's Head Farm to Tossamuck Farm at Great Kills. The sailboat sailed west along the Long Island Sound and south on the East River through the Narrows, encountering ice floes and a snowstorm before arriving safely at Great Kills, where Olmsted's possessions and potato harvest were unloaded. The foundations of the Ackerley farmhouse, which we know today as the Olmsted-Beil House, date from the 17th century, and these early 20th century photographs reflect quite accurately how it would have appeared during Olmsted's time here in the 1840s and 50s. One of Olmsted's earliest drawings is an undated sketch of the Staten Island farmhouse, probably circa 1849, but there's no context of the environ of the farm in the sketch. However, if we look carefully, we see that Olmsted has captured the view of the steamers and the sailing ships on Raritan Bay as seen from his porch. Olmsted's time on Staten Island is remarkable not so much for the landscape designs he initiated on the farm, which were informed by the most prominent landscape gardener of that time, Andrew Jackson Downing, but for the social connections Olmsted established there, which enabled him to first enter the field of writing, which in turn led him to become an outstanding figure in the history of landscape architecture in the United States. His neighbors included the publisher George Palmer Putnam, poet William Cullen Bryant, and railroad tycoon William Henry Vanderbilt. Olmsted certainly worked the land, planted seeds, and grafted saplings, particularly pear trees for the nursery trade, at his Staten Island farm. But the substance of Olmsted's time on Staten Island is to be found in the seeds sown in Olmsted himself to first pursue writing, and then what would eventually be called the discipline and practice of landscape architecture. When Olmsted set sail for Staten Island, there was no identifiable profession called landscape architecture. The term itself was as embryonic as Olmsted was in his professional pursuits. One of the earliest known instances of the term landscape architecture in the English language appeared only 7 years prior in Scottish botanist and gardener J.C. Loudon's 1841 book, Landscape Gardening and Landscape Architecture of the late Humphrey Repton, Esquire. Repton was known for his red books, portfolios of the garden plans and before and after views of the country estates that he designed in England. The exemplar of the profession at that time in the United States was the aforementioned Andrew Jackson Downing. These are a couple of the views that Repton puts together with the before and after of the idealized picturesque landscape. Olmsted not only knew Downing at that time through his writings, particularly the very popular A Treatise on the Theory and Practice of Landscape Gardening, adapted to North America, as well as Downing's publication, The Horticulturalist, but in fact had met Mr. Downing at his estate and nursery farm in Newburgh along the Hudson River. Olmsted's approach to farming, particularly on Staten Island, would be influenced by Downing's philosophy on landscape gardening as articulated in the treatise. Downing's treatise was a primer on the English landscape aesthetic, ranking the so-called picturesque as the ideal style, given its elegance in composition, expression, and form. The influence of Downing and his landscape theory on Olmsted is manifold. First, Downing's writings, particularly in The Horticulturalist, informed Olmsted's scientific approach to farming. Second, Downing's work inspired Olmsted to write. Downing even published some of Olmsted's earliest writings in The Horticulturalist. Finally, in what is arguably the most significant introduction in the history of landscape architecture in the United States, Downing introduced Olmsted to Calvert Vaux, an English architect and draftsman whom Downing had brought over to Newburgh to work as his so-called pencil in his landscape gardening firm. Following Downing's death in a steamboat accident in 1852, Vaux would soon become Olmsted's most distinguished collaborator, helping develop the Greensward Plan for Central Park in 1857, and is the primary designer of Prospect Park in Brooklyn, among numerous other projects by the Olmsted-Vaux partnership. Shortly before Vaux's death in 1895, Olmsted credited his own identity and career as a landscape architect to his former partner, saying, "I should have had nothing to do with the design of Central Park or of Prospect Park had not Vaux invited me to join him in these works. But for his invitation, I should not have been a landscape architect. I should have been a farmer." But all of this was yet to come for Olmsted. When he set sail for Staten Island, he knew of Downing's work and had digested his writings, but he was still searching for what would become his vocation. In terms of the actual physical design of Olmsted's farm in Staten Island, there's no extant evidence of Olmsted's planning and management of the farm. This lack of evidence speaks to the amorphous state of landscape gardening in the 1840s and 50s. More importantly, the lack of a drawn farm design speaks to the incipient state of Olmsted's professional life at that time. He was merely a gentleman farmer trying to make a profitable farm, but there was no indication that he was actively making physical drawings to lay out and operate on the Staten Island farm. According to Charles Cappan McLaughlin and Charles Beveridge, Olmsted applied Downing's theories of landscape gardening when laying out his farm on Staten Island, particularly noting that Olmsted took to heart Downing's plea that his fellow citizens should tastefully arrange and embellish their dwellings and property for both convenience and beauty. In terms of drawings and plans, Olmsted offered in a November 24th, 1851 letter to the horticulturalist, a one-to-one sketch of a pear, The crop he imported from France and harvested as his primary investment at the farm, influenced by Downing's other influential book, The Fruit Trees of North America. Even in Olmsted's circa 1849 sketch of the farmhouse, there's no context of the environs of the farm. But to get a sense of Olmsted's landscape work at the Staten Island farm, there are two documents that provide the most detail. The first is a late in life reminiscence by Olmsted's wife, Mary Cleveland Perkins. The second document is a recollection by Mr. Frederick Kingsbury, a friend of Olmsted's, which was recorded in 1903. Each of these recollections were published in the first compilation dedicated to Olmsted, 40 Years of Landscape Architecture, Frederick Law Olmsted, Landscape Architect, 1822 to 1903, edited by his son, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., and Theodora Kimball in 1922. Mary Perkins offered a description of the initial visit to the Ackerley farm by Olmsted and his father, John Olmsted, in the summer of 1847, which persuaded them to purchase the 130-acre farm for $12,000, the equivalent of $415,000 today. She also detailed the physical conditions of the farm and noted Olmsted's approach to farming. According to Perkins, the approach to the farmhouse was through a strand of trees of fair size: oaks, maples, sweet and sour gum, sassafras, holly, etc. After crossing through the stand of trees, the land opened to a clearing atop a small rise in soil of heavy red clay suitable for wheat. The land sloped gently down to the beach, offering a view out to the sea and the New Jersey environs southward of Sandy Hook and Navesink, and all of the outward and inward shipping. According to Perkins, there were no trees on this level, with the exception of one tall old pear tree, at the foot of which were found from time to time the bones of the slaves who had been buried there. Notable here is not only the detail of a possible slave burial ground, but also the single pear tree that might have persuaded the gentleman farmer Olmsted to follow the precedent of the land in selecting pears as the primary crop of the farm's nursery. Perkins's recollection suggests as much, particularly in noting that Olmsted planted fruit trees as part of the development of the nursery, particularly pears, quote, in such a simple, inexpensive way, using the old buildings on the place and practicing rigid economy, end quote. Though there's no existing plan, there's reason to believe that Olmsted would have planted its fruit trees in a gridded orchard and possibly used the tall old oak pear tree as one of the anchors. That's the extent of Perkins's recollection of the Staten Island farm. Kingsbury, for his part, provided a detailed description of Olmsted's landscape improvements as edited by Olmsted Jr. Kingsbury contrasts the initial appearance of the farm with Olmsted's improvements, which suggest Downing's influence. He writes, "The house was simple yet picturesque. The barns were quite near, and in the rear of the house was a small pond, 15 or 20 feet in diameter, used for washing wagons, watering stock, and as a swimming place for dogs, ducks, and geese. There was no turf near it. The whole place was as dirty and disorderly as the most bucolic person could desire. It was on the surroundings of the house that Olmsted first showed his genius at landscape construction. He moved the barns and all of their belongings behind a knoll. He brought the road in so that it approached the house by a graceful curve. He turfed the borders of the pond and planted water plants on its edge and shielded it from all contamination. Thus, with a few strokes and at small expense, he transformed the place from a very dirty, disagreeable farmyard to a gentleman's house." This is the most direct evidence of Olmsted's landscape designs at Staten Island Farm. We can see similar precedents in the work of Humphrey Repton, with the development of picturesque ponds as part of his before and after images for country estate designs. The success of these improvements of Olmsted's Staten Island farm can be inferred from one of his neighbors, the eventual railroad promoter William Henry Vanderbilt, who asked Olmsted to make such improvements to his own farm on Staten Island. Other indirect evidence of Olmsted's landscape improvements come in the form of cylindrical drainage tiling system that he installed under his farm, which removed excess water from the soil by way of a network of pipe tiles laid under the fields. This drainage tiling technique, which he had learned about in England, would be developed as part of his later work in Central Park with the sanitary engineer, George E. Waring, Jr., who had developed a manual on farm drainage entitled Draining for Profit and Draining for Health in 1867. Both men connected farming techniques to strategies for achieving public health in urban contexts, again, so-called sanitary strategies that would be echoed in the 1871 Staten Island Improvement Commission report. In many ways, Olmsted's social connections on Staten Island proved to be more constructive than his agricultural endeavors on the farm. The publisher George Palmer Putnam, who would encourage Olmsted to travel to England, and compile his writings into a full book was one, and the newspaper editor and poet William Cullen Bryant, who along with Downing was one of the first to call for a large-scale urban park for the city of New York. When Olmsted's brother John Hull Olmsted and his friend Charles Loring Brace, who were also part of Olmsted's social circle on Staten Island during this time, planned to embark upon a trip to England in 1850, Olmsted, envious of their wanderlust, wrote to his father and pleaded that he be allowed to abandon the Staten Island farm for most of that growing season. Olmsted's father granted his permission to Olmsted, who then set off for England, a trip that would produce several of Olmsted's social writings, such as The People's Park at Birkenhead near Liverpool, published under Olmsted's pen name Wayfarer by Downing in the Horticulturalist in May 1851. Upon his return stateside, Olmsted found support for his writing in none other than his neighbor George Putnam, who encouraged him to develop his writings from the English trip into the 2-volume Walks and Talks of an American Farmer in England, published in 1852. With the success of that publication, Olmsted would then embark upon a literary career that took him to the south and west of the United States, producing 3 major books in a span of 5 years. But it was through his lens of the farm at Staten Island that led to his development of ideas for social spaces, public health, and the impact of such public spaces on public health that would drive the success of the Greensward Plan and Central Park. Olmsted's interest in public health is manifest again during his leave of absence as Central Park Commissioner during the Civil War for his appointment as General Secretary of the United States Sanitary Commission from 1861 through 1863. By the time of his contribution as a member of the panel offering the 1871 report of the Staten Island Improvement Commission, Olmsted's experience as a farmer, writer, and designer of public spaces for public health had been fully formed. The recommendations of sewerage and drainage for both health and the prevention of disease on Staten Island, as well as its beautification, has its origins in the rich period of his early years of farming and wayfaring to and from the Staten Island Tossamuck Farm. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. That was so interesting, I think that really set the stage so well for how Olmsted came to Staten Island, and also his interest in what we're going to hear about in just a minute, in drainage and sanitation. So thank you so much for setting the stage so well. I just wanted to mention a couple things that folks mentioned in the chat. So I loved your comment about how you can just barely see the water in that line drawing of the house. And Eileen mentions that I love that Olmsted could see the ships from his porch, and now it seems so far away across Highland Boulevard.
It was a beautiful view. I think he really was compelled by the sea, and I find his wayfaring was often in that watery view as well.
Yeah, although he wasn't a huge fan of his first trip to sea when he went to China.
That didn't take.
Yeah. And Jeff also mentions, he says, I hope someday we can get someone to do a virtual simulation of what it was like back then, which is probably something you're familiar with working in architecture. But yeah, a 3D rendering and sort of augmented reality of what it used to look like would be really cool.
Awesome.
Great. Well, thank you so much. So we are going to kick it now to our next presenter, Ed Johnson. And keep your questions coming. If you have questions for any of our panelists, we'll also have time at the end, and you can drop them in the chat. So I'm going to invite Ed to come on. So welcome. I'm going to pull up your slides here, and now we're going to hear the details about the report of a preliminary scheme of improvements for Staten Island.
All right, so here we are. So this document has a typical long 19th century title and a report of the preliminary propositions to guide a plan of improvements 1871. So what you really have here is the first really comprehensive plan for the development of Staten Island. Now, these days, development is generally a dirty word. That usually means destruction of woodlands and everything else. But back then, Olmsted and his co-authors really wanted to improve the life of all Staten Islanders with these improvements that they were going to make. So it was really a beneficial thing. And this is just something, was not his introduction, but just a quote that I found in there that I thought kind of described what he was really looking for here. Basically, that if you beautify anything on the island, it helps everybody. Just improves their lives and improves property values, and it just makes everything better. So he really was trying to make things better for all Staten Islanders. And so what you have here basically is infrastructure. That's a word we hear a lot about lately, but this is what he was working on. So the report really covers these things: transportation, where he needed a modern, or for that time, a modern road system, and basically all roads lead to the ferry. So you needed a public drainage system to drain excess water off both public and private lands and roads, flood regulators for those storms, so you need something to do to handle all that water that comes down all of a sudden, and water preserves to provide clean drinking water for island residents. So don't forget, this was in the days before city water. So basically you had private wells to get your water from. So you needed some system, as the population of the island was increasing, to supply pure water for everyone. So these are all the things he was looking at. And today I'm going to look mostly at transportation. I feel that's something that still resonates with people now, because traffic is always a problem. So let's see what they were looking at back then, because even back then, you did have people using the roads. So he concocted a system of what he called high roads. Now he made a point in the report: you don't use the word avenue or boulevard, because he felt those words have been so corrupted by misuse that they were really meaningless, that people would just be like a wretched dirt track, as he called it, leading up to somebody's barn, and that would be called a boulevard. So he didn't like those terms at all. So he preferred high roads or highways. So you start out with the Westfield High Road. So a highway, now less than 100 feet wide, so that's pretty wide, considering that it's basically it's horses and carriages going up and down the road. This would go all the way from Tottenville to New Brighton Point. So New Brighton Point is what we would now call St. George, so down by the ferry. And he would take this by the most direct route, depending on the grade and how much it was going to cost. And this would shorten just trips in general within the island. And he gives examples of how many miles it would save. If you travel from here, you cut a half a mile or a mile off your trip, and shortens your trip to the garden markets. But also, mostly, it was looking to make your trip down to the ferry easier. Also, it would open up the districts of Keston and Middletown. Middletown, picture being kind of the area around High Rock Park now. So Middletown Forest is a common term we come across in old natural history records. So that was, not really well served by the road system at the time. So he was trying to open up these more remote areas and enable people to move around the island better. And so this is what it would have looked like. Don't forget, this road was I should back up and say, none of the recommendations that he made or that they made were actually adopted. But you do have this. This is approximately the path of the Westfield High Road. Now, I should say that this map also did not accompany the report. There were no maps. This map was drawn up by landscape architect Brad Green back in 1983, and this was published in the Proceedings of the Staten Island Institute of Arts and Sciences. So he kind of made up this map going by what's in the report and kind of what we know now. So just to give you an idea of where this is, or what's going on here. So the Westfield High Road, basically along kind of this stretch, you're following the path of what's now the Richmond Parkway. All right, so then From there, you'd go from Greenwich to St. George. You probably picked up Forest Hill Road and Woolley Avenue down to Victory Boulevard, and then from Victory Boulevard down to Bay Street and then to the ferry. So that's approximately the route that you see in green here. So that's the Westfield High Road. So now the Northfield High Road, a similar setup, but connecting the western part of Northfield again to New Brighton Point. So what's Northfield? Northfield, can picture that as the area in the northwest part of the island. So like Port Richmond, Mariners Harbor, Arlington, Bloomfield, those neighborhoods. And you had a growing population, especially in Port Richmond. So these people needed a better way to get down to the ferry. So he proposed this road. But also he was thinking about visitors from New Jersey. So he spoke of visitors from Elizabethport, which now we just call Elizabeth, and points west, coming to Staten Island basically for pleasure trips. But also if they wanted to get to Manhattan, coming through Staten Island and then getting the ferry and going into Manhattan. And he thought that the terminus, the western terminus for this, should be at a logical point to connect with a future bridge. So even back then, he was thinking that there's going to be a bridge between New Jersey and Staten Island at some point, especially with they're so close together. So let's see how that turned out.
I just had a quick question, Ed.
Sure.
What might be some of the attractions that someone coming from New Jersey or from Manhattan or Brooklyn that they would want to come and see on Staten Island in the 1870s?
I think at that time, probably really the scenery, just the pleasant scenery, especially depending on which roads you were taking. You would have views of the shore or of the kills between Staten Island and New Jersey, or just as a way to get into Manhattan, or maybe to go to farm markets here and such. So yeah. So anyway, so this is the Northfield High Road, and basically it's following the path of Forest Avenue from the Goethals Bridge and right along to Brighton Avenue, which would be down around here, down kind of where that Roman numeral 2 is, getting close to the ferry. Yeah, right around there. And then from thence, down to Jersey Street and then to the ferry again. And you have to remember also that there, he refers to the St. George kind of ferry area as the short ferry. It was really, because that was like kind of the closest point between Staten Island and Manhattan. But the ferry lanes at that time were at the foot of Jersey Street and also a little bit further down the shore. So not exactly at the site that we know of now. So that was the Northfield High Road. So now you have the Southfield High Road. So Southfield, just picture basically what we call the South Shore of Staten Island. So another wide road, 100 feet wide, from the western part of Southfield all the way down to the ferry area again. Now, he really said the best route to take really would have been Richmond Road. But because Richmond Road had originally been mapped to be 99 feet wide, which would have been plenty wide for this, but it was not built to that width originally. So what happened was, in the intervening years, you have what a lot of people called encroachments on the mapped roadbed, whether it was dwellings, businesses, farmland, whatever, to the point where if you tried to map that out to its original width or its mapped width, it would have been a lot of property issues, basically taking people's land away from them. And he realized that this was not something he really wanted to get involved with. So he suggested just basically building a road parallel to Richmond Road and following that route. And of course, this was not built, but what you basically do have is essentially Highland Boulevard, which was built many years later. You have Highland Boulevard, which is that the green line there, but also you had, he noted kind of like a spur off that, which would be Newdorp Lane, and that going up to Richmond Road, that part of Richmond Road that goes in through into Richmond Town. So that would have been the Southfield High Road. So basically, it's kind of, you know, Highland Boulevard, what we have now. So that's that. So now this is interesting. He also proposed a shore road. Now this is interesting, especially since, you know, the previous speaker was talking about how Olmsted had this kind of love for the sea and like the vista of seeing the ships go by. So he proposed a road, again, not less than 100 feet wide, going from Clifton and then south to Newdorp, and then joining up with the Southfield High Road near Great Kills, but then continuing on south all the way to Tottenville, and then up north to where it would meet, actually it would go along the shore, basically Richmond Terrace. So basically you would have this nice wide road completely encircling Staten Island, affording, you know, many scenic vistas, especially in the part that goes along the lower bay. Now this, of course, again, was never built. I mean, you do have some of these roads. You do have, you know, Highland Boulevard in some parts is very close to the water. Richmond Terrace goes right along the kill. But interestingly, if you flash forward about 100 years or so, you have Robert Moses proposing the same thing, a shore highway that would completely encircle Staten Island. Again, affording, you know, views of the shore, but, you know, from your car traveling at 50 or 60 miles per hour, which somewhat dilutes the experience, but also, more importantly, basically cuts off the waterfront from pedestrian use. So this was, you know, not popular with Staten Island when it was proposed, and this was never done. But Olmsted did propose something similar back, you know, 100 years earlier.
And I just wanted to mention here, as we're talking about roads, Alden mentioned in the comments, and I'm sure many Brooklynites were thinking about this as well, was Olmsted's planning for Eastern Parkway and Ocean Parkway in Brooklyn as well. And so this was around the same time, or this is a little bit after that, correct? Yeah. And
just the part of this that kind of does follow his route was if you take Lily Pond Avenue, which is up near the Verrazano Bridge, to Father Capitano Boulevard, and then to Highland Boulevard, you get kind of at least that first portion of that shore road, and Highland Boulevard, you know, south. So, okay. Now, so we'll leave the roads behind, and we'll take a look at public drains. So he, you know, realized you needed some kind of a drainage system. And even though he remarks in the report that it's really up to the individual landowners to create their own drainage system, but to have everyone kind of agree on some uniform system was really difficult and not likely to happen. So he proposed a series of public drains, and, you know, fairly close, no more than a half mile apart or any closer than a quarter mile apart. And then private landowners will be allowed to tap into those. So really proposing is an island-wide sewer system. And also these would drain the roadways as well. And he also was very adamant about avoiding open drains. He felt these were just a real problem. They tended to get clogged up either with garbage or with vegetation, especially during the summer when you have a lot of plants growing, just clogging them up. And then, because at all costs, you wanted to avoid stagnant or standing water. Standing water creates bad air, and then the bad air, you know, creates malaria. So at the time, the mosquito connection was not known. So, but it was very important to avoid any kind of stagnant water and avoid the formation of this bad air forming, which would lead to malaria. So likewise, you need flood regulators. And So again, he devised a system of pipes to pipe water from high elevations, because you don't want all that water running down these steep hillsides and it's causing erosion. So you have it piped down. He recommended 15-inch diameter pipes. And then these could be piped down to low, flat, kind of flat-lying areas where the water could accumulate and then gradually be directed to natural water courses, and then it would carry the water away. Also, suggested the use of these broad turf depressions used as catch basins, or call them safety ponds as well, where floodwaters would accumulate, and then they would all have outlets and slowly disperse those floodwaters. So, 100 years later, we actually decided to do this, and we call it the Blue Belt. But actually, this was really nothing new. He came up with this over a century ago. And we've seen that the Blue Belt is very effective. It's cost effective, and also it really works. So this is another good thing that he came up with, many years ago. So then you have the creation of water preserves. And so don't forget, that, as I said, you don't have a public water supply. So you need some kind of way to provide pure water for the local residents. So you have the Eastern Water Preserve and Public Commons. This would, because most of the population of Staten Island at that time was concentrated kind of in the northeast part of the island. So you would have had a series of water impoundments and distributing reservoirs for piping the water out to the households. But he also wanted to have these areas attractively landscaped, so they wouldn't just be reservoirs, but also be a public common. So for just to be attractive and also just to be of more value to the public. So you had the Eastern Water Preserve, and then you had the Western Water Preserve, which is for basically more of the South Shore, utilizing Lemon Creek and Benham Brook, again, impounding these waters and then piping them out. And also all connected by these public commons. So really, what you really have is kind of the start of a green belt forming here. Those black areas you see kind of in the middle, the black and the gray areas in the middle of the map, like above Middletown, those are the water preserves. So one looks like Silver Lake. You have, I think the Clove Lakes are in there, and you have other ones that would have been created. The one under the name Westfield is, that's Lemon Creek. That'd be the headwaters of Lemon Creek there. So those are the water impounds, all connected together by public commons. So, and that's basically the one above Middletown. That's really, that's like the half of the green belt right there. So, so already this whole area, this whole concept of public commons and water preserve was all taking shape. It's too bad they didn't actually do this. So, so you didn't really need these water. Once we became part of New York City, you didn't really need those water preserves anymore because we were on city water then. So now, closing thought. I just thought I'd throw this in. I found this quote in the water preserve section when he's talking about all these public commons and everything else. And again, it's all about preserving land for the public, for the benefit of the public, that will be safe from being destroyed, as you see, for private and selfish ends. So it's too bad that they made all these great recommendations in this report, but they were not acted on at the time. But I'm sure Jess will talk about this as we go forward into the 20th century. We do have a big movement to create public parks. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, Ed, thank you so much for that. And I think that really laid out the high points of this report. I just wanted to mention a few comments and questions we had here before we kick it over to Jessica. Joe asks, in laying out the island's roads, did Olmsted or maybe did anyone else ever consider a rectilinear grid for Staten Island?
I think the problem may have been with that is that you have that big, what he called the backbone of Staten Island, right in the middle. And that's the serpentinite formation. In fact, he mentions this, and when he mapped out the Westfield High Road, that you had to keep it north of that, what he called the backbone, because on that, the north side of it, it had a gentle slope. That's from glacial action. But as the glacier rode over that big hump, it created an extremely rough and rocky south side, or southwest side, so which was not good for roads at all. So I think that central formation would have been a problem in creating any kind of grid, because it's the elevation goes up to 400 feet all of a sudden at the highest point. So
Right.
It's not nice flat land.
And of course, the highest point in New York City, as we know, is in Staten Island.
Right.
Thank you so much. And I just wanted to, again, there's a great conversation that's going on in the chat, especially on the issue of drainage, which is at front of mind for everyone now.
Yes.
And thank you to Catherine for dropping a comment in about the question about the evidence of the drainage system that's still left at the Olmsted-Beil property. But we'll get to some more questions at the end of the program, but I want to make sure that Jessica has enough time to get through her presentation. But Ed, thank you so much for sharing that. So yeah, let's kick it over to Jessica.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jessica Kratz, coordinator of the Greenbelt Nature Center. The background shot behind me is not what it looks like today, but if you come here peak foliage time, about the first week in November, it'll look like that. I'm pretty sure this was a shot of that view in 2018 or 19. So I can definitely pick some things up from where Ed left off. And I think the reason I'm doing this today is because Jenny Schwadas, one of the board members of Friends of Olmsted-Beil, reached out to me and said there wasn't really a whole lot mentioned about the Greenbelt in the recent biography of Olmsted. So I'm going to try to fill in some of the gaps and kind of we'll pick up where Ed left off in some ways too. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to set the stage in 1843. Henry David Thoreau was here, and it's very likely that he hiked through Middletown Forest, and the Vanderbilt family acquired some considerable acreage in the area that's now High Rock Park. And this is 5 years before Olmsted father helped them buy Tussamuck Farm. And a fun little personal aside about Tussamuck Farm, I live in that zip code, and I have most of my life, 10312. So I live about a mile north of the farm. I'm about 3 miles inland from Highland Boulevard. It's a straight shot walking down that way. Next slide. So here's two maps of Middletown Forest that I found online, and to me it looks very kind of clearly like the Greenbelt. I kind of just see it pop out. In the map on the right, you could see some place names. New Springville, we still use that one. Willowbrook, that sounds familiar. Four Corners, that's closer to Staten Island Academy and kind of bordering the Greenbelt up there. So that's, Langan Davis, well known for Staten Island history. A lot of the nicknames are captured, and some of those names are still very much in use today. And if you look at kind of the shading in the map, you'll see kind of the wetland imprint. And of course, we're reminded of a lot of that during Sandy and during some of our more recent storms, Tropical Storm Ida as well. So just take a look at the shading as well as some of the place names. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've always kind of known some connection to the Greenbelt, because if you walk into the small octagonal room, the one that sometimes stages the children's classroom where our snake and our turtle are, there's this little paraphrase. In the case of Staten Island, it would be a simple plan to form the park. 4 miles in length, it was occupy a moderately central position and turn to good use a large extent of land. So basically it's like one of those kind of really just so logical things. All right, you can't really build on this land. It's in poor condition for roads. There's a serpentine spine, a ridge here. There's this parkland, and kind of go from mid-island to the sea. And yet, how long did it really take? Such a simple plan, right? Next slide, please. Simple plan. Over a century later, we're still working on things. So I just threw this in for fun here. Canadian band, and that was founded in 1999, which was the year that we got our carousel for old children, only 10 years after our nonprofit, the Greenbelt Conservancy, was founded. And next slide, please. So, you know, a lot of people who had the vision just didn't really have the fortitude or ability to act, but I love kind of the poetic language here. Middletown Forests, Olmsted thought of it as chain of ponds like pearls on a necklace. So if people described it, you know, that that language, that kind of poetic thing kind of helped it live on. We'll talk about how it lives on in the next slide. But one of the reasons that Tussamook Farm didn't really last so long is that Olmsted spent a lot of time writing letters to distant friends, extolling the glories of Staten Island. I so exceedingly enjoy the view, he allowed. Sometimes it is wondrous beautiful. So, you know, his capturing, you know, his use of the written word, you know, capturing it in letters, correspondence, books is kind of what helps the legacy live on. And, you know, just extol the virtues and know what's there. And it gives us a lot to draw on as we restore the house and just kind of continue to see how his legacy is alive and well. Next slide, please. So Erastus Wyman, the big kind of real estate magnate on the island, when we talked about land preservation in 1897, the land is a wilderness of such beauty pervaded this region that no expense can improve upon. And Langdon Davis kind of captured the whole thing. And I think William T. Davis is the most succinct. If you come into the Nature Center, you look at that lenticular hologram of a red-tailed hawk in flight over a fall foliage scenery of the Moses Mountain. And this quote is right there. The best park is certainly a piece of woodland left as nature arranged it with a path cut through it. And that kind of really does demonstrate not only, you know, the continuity of Olmsted's legacy and point of view, it also sort of captures Olmsted's design principles as well. Next slide, please. So it took a lot of time to get there. You know, some of those Vanderbilt tracts were, you know, consolidated into Boy Scout and Girl Scout land, and then the bridge opened, and that kind of, you know, real estate got real valuable, and some of that land got sold and bought back. And of course, we have the whole, you know, Robert Moses, the highway, and then Moses Mountain was going to be a scenic overlook through it. So the grassroots effort inspired by Jane Jacobs and the effort, you know, to kind of fight the Lower Manhattan Expressway, which would have, you know, had the Washington Square Arch as kind of, you know, along the edge of it. You know, here we are, you know, like we got inspired by that. There were a bunch of walks along the proposed highway route, you know, in the winter with Mayor Lindsay and things. And then 1971, exactly a century after Olmsted, you know, first proposed the simple plan for the park and the commission, the Greenbelt building in High Rock Park was dedicated a national environmental education landmark by the U.S. Department of Interior. So we go from, you know, a century later, we have some of the inroads, and we're still not at this point having a full robust Greenbelt. Next slide, please. So we moved very far into the future, and we kind of notice a trend. There's an economic downturn, and then there was pressure to sell land, and then we get that land officially protected. So first we have that in the early 80s with Ed Koch and the Bloodwood Valley kind of portion of the Greenbelt, and then we have it again with Camp Pouch, you know, in 2012, circa there. And then we have this book, which is a reprint of some of Marbury Brown and John G. Mitchell's original High Rock history, plus brings the story to circa 2008. So this is a wonderful volume, and we have it on sale for $20 at the Greenbelt Nature Center, and folks can email me about that if they're interested after. And next slide, please. So here's a current Greenbelt trail map, 35 miles of hiking trails, 2,800 acres. It sort of looks to me like a high-heeled shoe. You see that white trail going along what would have been the Willowbrook Parkway, and then the yellow and blue trails going along what the Richmond Parkway, and the park that I work in now, Latourette Park, would have been divided in 4 quadrants, kind of similar to what happens at Van Cortlandt Park. We would have had a lot more habitat fragmentation. It would be a lot less peaceful, a less nature to enjoy. And it's a pretty incredible place. You can check our website, sigreenbelt.org, for a lot more information. Next slide, please. So Olmsted's legacy. I mean, if he wasn't a 14-year-old boy who got poison sumac rather, and his eyes, he couldn't see for a while, maybe he would have gone on more with school, but during, that little encounter with nature, kind of started his little trajectory into exploring what he explored. And a lot of that is also the explorations he had over time with his father. So here we have, on the left, the father and son, and on the right, we have the scout troop creating an insect hotel. And this demonstrates some of the design principles. Next slide, please. So scenery, style, subordination, all the different principles here. So the last one, service, purpose or direct utility of service. And also you have subordination of all elements. So it's not one dominating thing. You want everything kind of to blend in. The rocks, the trees, kind of have an overall scene here. Next slide, please. So this quote here, and I know they asked about talking about kind of Olmsted as a wordsmith. The root of all my good work is an early respect for, regard, and enjoyment of scenery, and extraordinary opportunities for cultivating susceptibility to the power of scenery. So he very succinctly describes everything here. And so public health, Shirin-yoku has become, popular in the, since the early 80s. So it benefits mind, body, and spirit, better cardiovascular health, lower stress, lower cortisol hormone, booster immune system, booster moods. So as early as 1865, Olmsted knew it without having the science behind it. Time in nature provides relief from ordinary cares, change of air, and change of habits, and increases the subsequent capacity for happiness and the means of securing happiness. And next slide, please. So we're very much inspired by Olmsted's principles in the Greenbelt, and we created a Greenbelt Conservation Corps to kind of really maintain the trail, provide some place-based learning experience, and build on the activism and stewardship we've had. This summer we had Student Conservation Association, high schoolers, and now we're looking to bring some young adults back here in the fall. We're starting a orientation and training program next month. Next slide, please. And just some things we've done in spirit of Olmsted, native plant garden. We paint the trail markers so these simple paths through the woods kind of, are easier to access. We route some of things for better drainage, and an insect hotel to kind of, just attract more natural things into the habitat. And next slide, please. Kratz for all children represents Olmsted's vision to make compelling and accessible spaces. And, we have this right near the lake in Willowbrook. So, this is something all members of the family can really enjoy. It's open to it's open this year until for the second weekend of October. It's open Saturdays and Sundays. So from the smallest children, persons with disabilities, and kind of build on the legacy of the Willowbrook State School that was in the site. So it was fully accessible carousel, so it first opened to the public in 1999. And here's my contact information. Thank you.
Jessica, thank you so much for sharing that. And I know the Greenbelt is one of my favorite places. And what I want to do now is just invite all of our panelists to join us. And if we have any other questions, and we've had such a great discussion going on in the comments. So thank you to all of our panelists for sharing. And Eileen, if you want to join us as well. And we also have Maureen who helped to put this wonderful panel together. So just looking through some of the comments, obviously a lot of people were very interested in drainage. And Catherine, thank you for sharing your comments in the chat about some of the archaeological evidence of Olmsted's drainage system that can still be found in certain places. So I was just wondering, since we're a little bit over time right now, if anyone from our panel would like to comment on sort of the legacy that you see today of Olmsted that's kind of reflected in this improvement plan that we still see today. I don't know if Catherine, since you kicked off the program, do you want to kick off our final comments?
Sure. I mean, I think it's really fascinating to see how smart. I love the question about, did Olmsted put down a grid? And he would never have done that, I think. I mean, there are spectacular visionary plans for Staten Island which do grid the island, but I think Olmsted was, his legacy as a farmer really was that he could read topography in a really profound way. And part of that was through the need to drain, right? So drainage is all gravity driven. It's all about what's the high point, the low point, where are the water bodies and the rivulets that you need to move water toward. So that farming knowledge, the scientific farming that he really practiced for much of his early years, really found its place in landscape architecture in a really interesting way, where he read topography and engaged topography in a very compelling way, which was more than just a kind of scenic or bucolic or picturesque view, but it was rather an ecological view. And even that word didn't exist at this time. But he was looking at ecologies of how things flow, how you can gather water, move water. Ed laid it out so clearly in his talk, and looked at ridges and valleys and thinking about how to move water slowly, but not to let it be standing still. So I think there's so much of that. We see that the Boston Emerald Necklace played out. It would have been amazing to see that plan realized on Staten Island.
Yeah, and Jenny makes a comment here about the sort of way that Olmsted was able to kind of sell these concepts. So the notion of a safety pond. And so, you know, he had a way with words, and she suggests that maybe this is a future program. Yeah, Ed, you want to share any of your thoughts about the kind of legacy of this report 150 years later?
I think it comes through in the creation of the Blue Belt on Staten Island. Because when you read his improvement report, he's describing the Blue Belt. All about when you're creating these safety ponds, the flood regulators, all of that. That's all now what we call the Blue Belt, where you're just gathering water and you're letting it be released slowly, not in this great gouts of water that are going to cause erosion and damage, but you're holding on to it in retention ponds and then slowly releasing it. And that's what he was talking about. But it just took us 100 years to figure that out.
Yeah. And Ken here says, I've never been to the Greenbelt Nature Center, but now I definitely plan to find my way there. So thank you, Jessica, for giving us that great background and, you know, wonderful presentation about the work that you're doing there today and how it really does reflect the legacy of Olmsted. Anything you want to add before we go?
I just think that, you know, this is a great moment where we can explore and enjoy wherever we are, whether it is visiting that park that's kind of not so far from us that we've always wanted to, or learning about other parks and places. And I know for me, I remember having an occasion to travel to Buffalo, and I was at the Buffalo Zoo, and they're like, well, this is an Olmsted Park right here. And I'm just putting it all together, you know, wow, really? Here, there, and everywhere. I mean, and I guess we're just going to keep on learning more and building to this as we approach and go beyond the 200th birthday.
Great. Well, we got some wonderful comments here. What a great presentation. And we also got a thank you from Dee Petrie from the National Association of Olmsted Parks. So again, thank you for your support. And I'll just give the last word to Maureen, who helped put this program together, and Eileen, if you want to add anything as well.
Thank you all for your work putting together your presentations so that we could all learn so much from you. I can't wait to watch your presentations again. They're so chock full of information. Thank you all.
Thanks everybody so much for joining us. Apologies, we went a few minutes over, but there was just so much to talk about and we had such a great discussion. Thank you for sharing all of your questions and your insights. We'll be following up with you with a recording if you missed any part of it or want to share it with your friends, as well as resources about the various organizations and work that we talked about tonight. So thank you all so much on behalf of myself, my colleague Amanda, working hard behind the scenes, all of our panelists, Friends of Olmsted-Beil House, and our team at Turnstile Tours. Thank you all so much and have a great night.
Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much.